Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sunday School Dropouts podcast. We are so excited that you're with us here today.
Yes, it's so good to be here. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Really excited about who our guest is.
Yeah.
Now, before I get to that, though,
Yes.
I'll turn it over to you, Laura. Did we have some announcements, I believe?
We do. So I just wanted to let people know that the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery is offering support groups again this spring. And they start, if you're listening to this episode in real time, they start in about a week, but there is still room for you to sign up. You can sign up for one, you can sign up for multiple if you want. But I'm really excited about this slate of groups that we have this, I guess we could say semester. We offer them twice a year. But it's everything from developing boundaries, safety and pleasure after high control religion, deconstructing kind of common religious topics, navigating family dynamics, which I know is super important right now. Many of us are facing, getting in touch with your younger self. I feel like I'm missing, and healing after toxic religion. So there's 6 different groups that people can participate in. So if you're interested in that, I would highly recommend you go to traumaresolutionrecovery.com and click the support groups link under our services tab. That'll all be in our show notes as well. But yeah, we've got some really incredible practitioners who are not only trauma informed, but trauma trained and have both personal and professional experience in navigating high control religion, cults, fundamentalism, and religious trauma. So so if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you need a little bit of extra support, I think this is a really great option. And I'm hopeful that people sign up because I think all the groups are great.
Yeah, no, I love I saw the list. I was really very pleasantly surprised at how many different ones we have in the variety.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be awesome.
Yeah, it'll be really
really
cool.
good resource.
Yeah. So jumping into our episode today, I'm excited to have Andrew Pledger on our podcast. And trying to think, for those people who don't know, like Andrew Pledger is, I think, probably most known. I'm curious to know where you heard of him, Andrew. Most known for his work on kind of exposing Bob Jones University, which is a Christian university in Southern Carolina. But I've been aware of Andrew and his work and talking to him for probably 4 or 5 years at this point. And he has just got a heart of gold, is so passionate about helping other people, exposing fundamentalism. And he is just like such a delight to talk to. He's extremely articulate and very passionate about the things that he talks with. So yeah, I'm excited for our conversation today. It's so good.
Yeah, no, I feel the same. He's a great person, and yeah, I've you may have known him a little longer than I have, but I mean truly, I know just in that deconstruction social media space, I've known who he is for 3 or 4 years. I think I don't know that I've spoken with him directly, but I've definitely seen and really appreciated from afar, I guess, the work that he's been doing.
Yeah.
Just talking about his own experience with Bob Jones University and, unpacking all of that. And so, it's about time that I finally connect with him directly. So really excited about today.
Yeah. And for those people who are interested to know this, so we asked Andrew to come in to kind of fit in with what we're talking about, when we're talking about financial trauma, medical trauma as a result of, fundamentalism and high control religion. So we're talking today specifically about the financial burden that Christian colleges or religious colleges really place on people. And so we're focusing on that, but you'll hear parts of his stories and you can hear us in the episode saying, oh, we need to do another episode because his story is so fascinating. Not only how he got to Bob Jones University, which he explains a little bit in our episode today, but also just like how he was led away from Bob Jones University. It's extremely, extremely interesting. And so we will have him back on for another episode to go deeper into that and his experience there. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, absolutely. As usual, just wanted to say that we recognize that some of the topics we discuss in any episode may bring up feelings, emotions, and triggers that may require more processing or be too much to handle right now. Please always feel free to skip any episode or parts of episodes and come back if and when you're ready. Our goal is to help you trust your own body and lived experience, so take what you need and leave what you don't. All right, so now it is time for flannel graph story time. It's funny, I always say that word and I always get almost tongue-tied. I have to really focus on saying flannel graph. I don't know why.
Flannel graph, yeah.
It's like my mouth wants to say something else. I'm not sure what, though. Anyway, it is time for that time.
Yes.
And yeah, we love to always like share kind of some stuff that we're like reading, listening to, working on.
Mhm.
But yeah, what do you have going on these days, Laura?
Yeah. So, to be honest, it's been an interesting few months, as I'm sure, maybe it has been for you and for others as well, just in terms of like what I stay up to date on and taking care of myself, because right now seems to be a very chaotic time. As I was thinking about what I wanted to share today, kind of some of the things that have been useful for me, I thought of two things. One of them is I've been really conscious, especially since the beginning of this calendar year, of ways to stay engaged, like with social and political issues, and stay informed, because I don't want to just bury my head in the sand, which would be way easier to do. Um, but ways to do that, but also not so that I'm not, like hyperactive all the time or hyperactivated all the time, which I think is also extremely easy to do, especially when we're on social media and we work with clients. So we're hearing things all day, every day. So the couple things that I've really been kind of investing my time in is some nonpartisan news podcasts. And so there's a couple that I listen to that are from like outside of the United States. So it just gives like a different viewpoint. And then there's also one inside the US where they literally just read the headlines. They talk about what it means in a nonpartisan way. And I found for myself that that's been really, really helpful to stay informed, but not activated all the time. And then there's another woman who I believe, so she used to be a commentator on some news stations, but and I think she used to have a podcast, but she doesn't anymore. She is a bit more left leaning, but she takes a nervous system approach to how to listen to the news. So how do we stay regulated and, in our bodies as we're hearing different news headlines, and recognizing how when we're activated, how that can shift the way that we're interpreting different stories, different figures, different experiences. So as a therapist and as a coach, I really appreciate that. But it's also such a good reminder for myself to really make sure that as I'm listening, whether it's to my clients or scrolling on social media, that I'm checking in with myself to make sure that I'm regulated so that I'm able to kind of view things through that lens. So her name is Jessica Yellen. She's actually been on Glennon Doyle's podcast a few times since
Yeah.
the inauguration, and it's just felt really, really helpful. It doesn't necessarily make things any better or worse in terms of what the things actually are, but when you're able to hear them from that more regulated space, it feels like you have more choice in what do you want to do with them. And so I've been really appreciative of that. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's been how it's been one of the things I've been really intentional about. And then I do have a way that I'm like totally disengaging. And that is like as much reality TV and reality TV podcast as possible.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
Yeah. But it's been a journey with that. What about you? What's been
So,
on your flannel graph nowadays?
yeah. So yeah, I mean, a few things. Well, one thing I'm doing, getting started, I guess maybe this is a good enough time to announce it, sort of, kind of. I don't know. I'm going to actually be doing stuff on Substack now. Um,
Nice. Yeah.
and it's going to be specifically oriented towards folks who are former Adventists.
That's awesome.
It's one of those things where every time I mention that or post anything on Instagram that references that, I guess I just assume everybody knows that about me now, but
Yeah.
there's always new folks who then find me as a result of these posts,
Mhm.
or when I maybe say something in a podcast about being former SDA. And and they're like, I had no idea. And then
Yeah.
it's so lonely because there's not many, or at least there's not many vocal former
Yeah.
SDAs out there, I guess.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, like, I'm just realizing, yeah, actually, okay, because I don't know that the world needs another deconstruction Substack, but that's a pretty niche thing that like I don't know a lot of other substantial platforms or folks who work in the mental health side of things like talking about Adventism specifically.
Oh.
So yeah, I'm gonna start doing that, and also I'm kind of doing more, trying to make an emphasis of connecting and just making community with people that are actually near me,
Yeah.
like-minded people around me. Like nothing against social media, I
Right.
love it, but like trying to just connect with people like in Northeast Tennessee that are more progressive, that are more blue, that are more, but also like into the arts,
Yeah.
into writing, into just the stuff that I'm naturally into.
Yeah.
Um, And it actually, I will say Threads has actually helped with that
Oh,
tremendously.
that's awesome.
I held out for years getting on Threads,
Yeah.
and then when I finally deleted X completely,
Mhm.
um, I kind of replaced it with Threads. And I don't know, the algorithm over
Yeah.
there so far is working very well, organically finding people that are into similar things that are not people I already knew.
That's so
And so,
great. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It's been kind of cool for that. So,
There really is something to and we've talked about this on our podcast before, just that idea of like getting connected to the people around you, like who are the people that you can have influence on, that they can have influence on you. I don't mean like in a controlling way, but like where it's like, oh yeah, like I think whether it's because of the pandemic or whatever, like we can oftentimes become so siloed in like an echo chamber essentially, and we forget that when we're with real people, like our nervous systems have to grow and flex and like take in other information, and you realize that a person is so much more than one belief or one practice or whatever. They are a more complex person, and it allows for conversation to happen. It allows for relationship and allows for you as the human to grow. And I think it's so important that we do that, maybe now more than ever.
yeah, I think I agree. I mean, honestly, that's even something that I know I've talked to about folks like in a professional capacity
Yeah.
about, just the importance of even like having community, like real life, like
Yeah.
who are your, who are your people like in real life, and emphasizing like being physically spending time with people that you enjoy spending time with, like
Mhm.
it's not, so everything is not just online.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love it. Well, I'm excited for you in that because I mean, I just think that's so important, and maybe I need to take a cue from you also. Andrew Pledger is a cult survivor, podcaster, and writer. Raised in the independent fundamental Baptist movement, he discovered his queer identity and was determined to leave the group. He eventually escaped after being expelled from Bob Jones University, an insular fundamentalist college. He eventually graduated from SNHU with a BA in General Studies and Psychology, intending to help other survivors. To understand and recover from his cult upbringing, Andrew immersed himself in cult education. He now uses his experience and knowledge of cults to raise awareness and educate people about these dangerous groups. Podcasting has become a platform to help him. Sorry, let me say that over. Podcasting has become a platform for him to educate others. His podcast, Surviving Bob Jones University and Beyond BJU, Exposing Fundamentalism, sheds light on the harms of Christian fundamentalism. He believes in the power of survivors' stories to bring awareness and spark change. We are so thrilled to have Andrew Pledger on our podcast today. Crowd goes wild.
Ooh, yay, happy to be here. Oh, I'm looking forward
Yeah.
to this.
It's so good to have you here.
I know we were talking before we started recording just how like you're one of those accounts on like, well, Instagram specifically. That's where a lot of my presence is. Like I've known about your background, kind of just your journey and everything. A lot of your background with Bob Jones University for a few years. I feel like I mean, I'm not gonna say like, oh, I know you, but like I've seen you around. Like, so again, I really appreciate you being here. Yeah, really excited to have you on. You're definitely one of those accounts that like I've known of you for quite some time, and have always appreciated like your commentary and the work that you're doing on everything.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I know before we recorded, I was saying to you how, I remember following you in the beginning, the deconstructing everything, I think was your account. And I remember finding Laura too, and like learning about religious trauma. So thank y'all. Y'all are like the trailblazers who have paved the way for a lot of people. Just deconstructing and finding that language is so important in the validation for that. So thank y'all for the work that you have done and the work you're doing now.
Thank you. That's so
Yeah.
kind. Yeah, we're all in this together. So
Yeah.
everybody brings such a necessary voice into this space.
Well, I would love to hear some of your background and growing up in Christian fundamentalism. Just I know
Oof.
broad question. No pressure, of course.
No, I'm laughing because like it's funny because as I've been processing out loud the last several years, it's been interesting to see how much I've processed and how I've explained it, and I'm still processing. But yeah, I mean, for those, I'll try to do a short summary, I guess. And if y'all want me to dig further into anything, let me know. But yeah, I was raised in the independent fundamental Baptist movement. My parents met at Hiles Anderson College, which was started by Jack Hiles, and it was attached to the church called First Baptist of Hammond, Indiana, which is actually featured on the documentary on Max called "Let Us Pray: A Ministry of Scandal." So my parents met in his church cult, and met at his college. And yeah, I know there's a lot
Yeah.
to unpack with that. So yeah, my parents followed Jack Hiles, and they ended up back where my dad lived in North Carolina in Winston-Salem at I'm just going to say IFB because it's so long. It's so hard to
Yeah.
say the independent
Fair.
fundamental Baptist. It's just so
Yeah.
much. So I'll just say IFB
Yes.
from now on. But they ended, well, when they got to North Carolina, I think there were maybe like two IFB churches they were at before I was born. And my dad, he studied to be in the ministry. So my dad was in the ministry before I was born. By the time I was born in 2000, they had finally picked an IFB church called Gospel Light Baptist Church, which is located in Walkertown, North Carolina. And I mean, this is something I haven't talked about as much publicly, the specific church I'm from, because I was terrified in the beginning to talk about it because of how influential it is. I would say it's a top 10 influential IFB church in the top 10 in the
Yeah.
country. I would say it's not as much anymore, but after calling out Bob Jones, now after doing that, I'm not afraid to really talk about it. But it was led by Brother Bobby Robertson for 60 years. So Gospel Light Baptist Church, the IFB church, that was all I knew growing up. I was homeschooled my entire life with IFB curriculum. And for those who aren't familiar with the IFB, it's kind of been hard for me to explain, but I've kind of made some points just to summarize it quickly. But the IFB, it originally started in the 1930s with Jack Frank Norris, who kind of started it, but not really. But it didn't really, I guess, start until Jack Hiles in the 1950s. And basically, it started as a reaction to modernism and mainstream Baptist denominations. So they decided to break away. So I don't consider the IFB a denomination because they don't have an official board over them. That's why they're called independent. They're their own thing. No one can hold them accountable. And I think that is really one of the things that makes the movement very dangerous and ripe for a lot of harm and abuse. So these churches are autonomous with no denominational oversight. There's a strict adherence to the King James Version as the Bible as the only legitimate translation, a strong emphasis on soul winning, also known as evangelism, and very patriarchal, very authoritarian teachings, a lot of strict rules around clothing, music, movies, the friends you could be with, and disbelief in a separation from the outside world and even other Christian denominations who teach anything differently. And the outside world was very much portrayed as just very evil and controlled by Satan. And there was such a fear of like, if you left the IFB or strayed in any way, you were on a path of destruction. And it was just a slippery slope. Like they were the only ones that were right. And if you went away from them, you walked away from them, you were walking away from God, and your life would just be a wreck and be awful, and you would never find happiness. So
Yeah.
that's a gist of the IFB. I don't know if there's anything that you want me to go into
Yeah.
with that at all, but yeah.
That's so fascinating because we had a few IFB folks on the podcast, so there's so many similarities. And then I think each church can sometimes, like you said, have some differences because of the independent piece, but it's just so incredibly strict. And it's interesting because, I know that IFB has their own schools. Like you said, your parents, met at this IFB school or college, use that term lightly, I guess.
Yes.
But then you were homeschooled. And I know since we're talking about like higher education and the finances and just all of that, like how did you get to that decision, coming out of this really strict background and now you're going to a public school? I mean, it's a private college, but it's a public school. It's definitely not homeschooled. But what was kind of the appeal, and like, was there any other options? Could you have done anything else other than go to somewhere like Bob Jones?
Yeah. So this is actually the interesting and kind of funny part of my story. So, but yeah, with the IFB, they do have a lot of IFB K through 12 schools, and then a lot of IFB colleges at these bigger churches that will be extensions of their ministry. So that was First Baptist Hammond. They had Hiles Anderson as an extension. And with a lot of these schools, and that's the thing too, Bob Jones, they are not attached to a church. Um, which a
Okay.
lot of these which I don't call Bob Jones an IFB college. I don't consider it that, even though some people do call it that, but they've never been associated with an IFB church. So I don't call it an IFB college. But they do have a lot of similar teachings and approach to things in theology too. So there's similarities there. Um, but yeah, so in the IFB, usually they will have these lists of colleges, IFB colleges they will promote. So growing up, I heard about Hiles Anderson. I heard about Crown College. I heard about West Coast. I heard about Pensacola, Christian College. I think, I'm trying to remember, there probably were others, but those are the main ones that I heard that were promoted over and over again. And for the men were expected to go to that. Now, for women, if they were going to go to college, it was only learning how to be a good homemaker, a good wife, or just to find a husband.
Yeah.
So I want to say that for the women, it was all about learn your role in this world to be a homemaker and a servant to your husband and to men. But for men, it was expected to go to a Bible college to, I guess, like grow your faith. And there was a major pressure for men to commit to full-time ministry. And that was interesting to me because that was my parents were very much indoctrinated into every bit of the IFB, but that was the one instance that I saw them disagree with them, the pressure for men to commit to ministry, because my own dad's personal experience, they made him, well, I believe that they made him feel that that was the only option, that he was called to do that. And then when he got into it, he realized, oh my goodness, this is actually not for me. But going back to education, so yeah, homeschool K through 12, and then they go to college. That was terrifying for
I
me
bet. Yeah. I bet.
to live this very isolated, insular life. Being homeschooled, being like the IFB being the center and of my world and controlling every aspect of my life, to then go into school with several or a couple, at least a couple thousand students. Like that was a big switch, even though, yes, it would be similar teachings and things, but just to be around all those people, learning the social skills, like adapting to roommates and all these different things. So, I mean, for me, what was important for me when I got to the point to want to go to college, I had decided when I was 17 years old, I knew, and that's a whole journey in and of itself, but I knew I wanted to leave the IFB. And at that point, I realized I was gay, which is an abomination in that environment. So I was just absolutely terrified. Just so much trauma. I didn't have the term trauma then, but just grappling with that, just a trauma from that and religious trauma in general. And then, I was experienced a lot of mental health issues growing up, and I was always blamed and shamed for that. You go to the Bible, you don't go to mental health professionals, you don't see a psychologist. They will steer you away from God or put you under Satan's influence. And so I found a book about spiritual abuse in a bookstore, like accidentally. It was in the Christian section. It was a Christian who wrote about it. And that was, when I read it, like that was the first terminology I found,
Yeah.
spiritual abuse. And when I read it, I was like, oh, wow, I just read the beginning chapter in that bookstore, and I was like, this sounds just like the IFB.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so,
Wow.
and like it really validated me. And I was like, and even just after finishing that chapter, I'm like, oh, wow. Like I remember thinking, it's not my fault. It's not because I'm not praying enough. I'm not doing enough. Like I had never thought to question the system, because that was questioning God, and you
Right.
don't do that. So anyway, so at 17, I was like, oh my goodness. Like once I eventually did get that book, and after reading it, I was like, I have to leave the IFB. how am I going to do that?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know anyone in the outside world. Like I'm, and like I don't even know if I have the strength or skills to even do that. So anyway, so then I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to college. And when I looked into these colleges, I saw that none of them were accredited.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, so if it's not accredited, then I can't get a job outside of your system, then I cannot leave. It's gonna be very difficult to leave. So then I was like, is there a college that exists that has accreditation where it is actually at least worth something in the outside world? And Bob Jones University, that was which really surprised me, which I had heard the name Bob Jones growing up, but I had never heard about Bob Jones University. My church never promoted this school at all. It never talked about it. So I was looked into it. And I'm like, okay, like it's fundamentalist and it's accredited. And at this point, like, I wanted to get a college education. If I really had options, then I probably would not have gone to a Christian college at all.
Sure.
But for me, with the fun, still depending on my parents and still, trying my best, like working fast food and like making minimum wage, like it was just, yeah, anyways. But so anyway, so Bob Jones was that option. I was like, okay. I was like, wow, I'm gonna have to go to Bob Jones University to escape this environment. Okay, here we go. I'll just stop there for now.
I just like I know
Wow.
we have some other questions about that, but I'm like so blown away at just the level of curiosity you had and like the brave, like you have such a brave nature, like to go and read books and to be able to delineate, like, okay, at 17 years old, I know like this is spiritual abuse. I have to get out of this system.
Mm.
And then the accreditation piece, like I never thought of that when I was 17.
Oh, same.
Like, yeah, I'm just like, that's so incredible. Like, what a gift you had to
Thank
just like your
you.
mind to be like, okay, I need to think about these things. And you thought like the long-term plan of like, how do I legitimately get out of this and stay out of this versus, like running away and, I don't know, ending up who knows where, right?
Yeah,
Like that.
I
I mean,
know.
it just feels like really you have so much resilience.
Thank you for saying that. That's so sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
truly, I can't. I mean, even just comparing to my personal story, I can't. I was nowhere near questioning leaving.
Yeah.
Like, well, my background of Adventism, right? When I was 17, like, oh no, I was. Oh gosh, I hate to say, I was like coming right into the thick of it, where I was like
Mm.
probably most on fire to be a part of that.
Wow.
So yeah, that's it's amazing.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And like, yeah, people have said that to me before, and like I've really thought about it. And I think my sexuality was such a big thing that made me question that. That didn't fit what they said.
Yeah.
And eventually it got to the point where it's like, oh, well, they must be wrong or they're lying. And so that was just something that, once you start to pull that thread,
Yeah. Yep.
it just so it's interesting because like even though there was so much trauma from being gay in that environment, it was ultimately was a thing I think that really got me out very
Yeah.
early and saved me from a lot
Yeah.
more trauma in that environment.
Yeah,
That's incredible. Wow. Good for you.
Thank you.
That's so cool.
yeah. So and now just to make sure I'm understanding, so Bob Jones University, they are accredited.
They are accredited, and I
Okay.
believe that happened in actually 2017. And
Okay.
they were not accredited for the longest time. And as I looked through their history when I was making the Surviving Bob Jones podcast, they were so proud of the fact that they weren't accredited and that they weren't influenced by the government at all or took federal aid, which they do now very
Yeah.
much. And so it was just funny to me. And like there was a whole like court case in like I think the 70s or like 80s with Bob Jones versus the United States about like their tax exempt status being revoked because of all the racism and everything. That's a whole other thing. And it was such a long battle with that. But yeah, they are accredited, which is really it was so strange to me. I'm like, oh wow, an accredited fundamentalist college.
Yeah.
It's surprising to me, but yeah, we can dig more into
Yeah.
whatever y'all want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I was curious. Yeah, I was just wanting to make sure I was understanding that part
Yes.
correctly because my next question though was that just accreditation in general when it comes to Christian colleges and the ones that were encouraged for you to go to specifically. Like I think I maybe already know the answer to this, but was accreditation something that was important to anybody, or was that like no? It's not that's not the important piece anyway.
See, it's funny because Bob Jones, they would tout that a lot when I was there, how they're accredited. And it was something I think that made them feel like they were more special than these other colleges. Like, we're accredited and we're still teaching the truth. And, we don't
Mm.
compromise.
Yeah.
And so there is this very much prideful nature. And it was like this, I don't know, like even like when I looked into the school, I did ask about accreditation, and I can't remember all the differing accreditations and like what they mean. I mean, it was important to the people there, and even with recruiting, they're like, "Oh yeah, we are accredited. You can get a job here, and here, or whatever, like in the business world and here, and so it would." That was a big selling point, I think, for them, and you can still keep Christ and have this good, good accredited education.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I know all colleges are expensive. Accredited colleges can, sometimes justify that as, well, you pay this price, but you have legitimacy. But, I did in prep for this interview, I looked up the tuition of Bob Jones, and I don't know if this is what you paid when you went there, but right now it's sitting at about $35,000
Yeah.
a year, which
Oh.
is, room, tuition, board, all that stuff. So I'm, kind of a twofold question would be how do they propose that we're going to be, paying this bill, or how are students affording it? Especially because there are so many people who send their kids there that also went to schools that were very similar. So had ministry jobs, didn't have great paying jobs. And we know that ministry does not pay particularly well unless you are
No.
like the head pastor and those sorts of things. So yeah, how did you afford it, and what did that get you? Obviously you get
Yes.
an education, but does that also mean that you're required to abide by all these rules? What were those? I know it's a big question,
Okay.
so break it up however you want to.
Okay, got you. So the first part was the affordability. Okay, I'll get into the
Yeah.
affordability. Yeah, so that was something that was okay. So that was another obstacle when I was looking to Bob Jones. So when I first was applying there, I'm trying to remember. I want to say it was maybe around like between $24,000 a year when I first applied, and that was in 2017.
Yeah.
Yes, and when I was there, it would raise $2,000 every single year that I went there.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yes.
That's $22,000 to $30,000 is a big gap. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're
So
like raising it like 10% every year,
Oh.
roughly, based on what. Yeah, wow.
yeah,
That's
so
a
it is
lot.
insane. So I remember, I mean, I was motivated. I was like, okay, I want to go to this school. It's so expensive. I'm going to apply for scholarships, and I'm going to be on, Bob Jones Work Scholarship was a way you could work at the school, and you could have the option to have it all go towards your tuition or keep it and then put part of it towards it and then keep the other parts of it. So for me, when I worked at Bob Jones, it was only like 20 hours a week, but that would always go towards my tuition. I remember I saved working at Chick-fil-A. I saved like $7,000 right before like it's just nothing.
Wow. No, it's nothing, but that's also a lot of hours at Chick-fil-A.
Oh, I know. Like I was just working and working, and like that's all that I was going for. And
Yeah.
like I was, and oh my gosh, I know what we're saying this out loud. It put you on this path to constantly be working and stress and trying to strive to pay this because I was grateful. I actually got a scholarship from Masters Club. Their scholarship. I can't remember how much that was. And then I got a Chick-fil-A scholarship, I think too. I didn't remember how much that was either. But and then and I saved a lot, and I'm grateful that my dad, he had a good income. So a lot of people there did not. So they would also help in that aspect. I think I can't remember how much percentage they would pay of it, but like I was still putting, I don't want to say that they completely paid for it because they definitely did not. I put a lot towards it. But yeah, it was still a lot of stress I remember just constantly thinking just, oh my gosh, like, can we make this? Can we make this next bill? Or, oh, how much? And thankfully when COVID happened, they froze tuition that year, which I was so grateful.
Oh, wow.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, how thankful, right?
Yeah, I know, that's horrible. I know the world is like falling apart. I know it's a horrible thing to
I
say.
guess we won't raise the tuition by 10% this year. Yeah.
Yeah. um, and then, with the other aspect, with the rules, I mean, I had mixed feelings about it because, my entire life underneath the authority of my parents in the IFB, but I was going to Bob Jones and I wasn't gonna have my parents
Mhm.
watching my every move. Of course, there were still authority figures that would be at Bob Jones, but to me, I was talking to someone, it was different because I can disobey a leader. They're not
Yeah.
my parents. You know what I mean? But even getting there though, that was hard for me to learn. I had to wait to say this. Bob Jones made me into a rebel. Like I was always the goody two shoes growing up. I followed everything perfectly. I followed the checklist
Yeah.
that was expected of me. And I remember getting to Bob Jones, and when going there, you have to read their handbook, and you have to sign. I remember what they called a covenant
Yeah.
to say like I'm gonna follow these rules, and they have the right or whatever to do to kick me out or whatever. And so it's hard because there's a lot of people that will, especially like online and with the podcast when it came out, just blamed me and said, "Wow, it's your fault
Mm.
for going
Yeah.
there, like you knew what you were getting yourself into." And it was like, yes and no at the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
time. It was like, there were aspects, and to me, people say, oh, if you didn't want to follow rules, you shouldn't have gone. And for me, the rules weren't necessarily the issue. It was the way the rules were enforced and the culture
Yeah.
that it created. And
Yeah.
even like there were some things that happened that I didn't know. I didn't know that I would be followed off campus if they suspected me of anything. And that happened to me twice that I knew of, that I
Yeah.
was followed off campus. And then also like I didn't know either, which freaked me out, is like their systems could get alerted of notifications on our phone.
Are you
Yes. I'm
serious?
serious. I got called into I think it was a dorm supervisor because there was a notification that popped up on my phone and it alerted their systems and we had to have a conversation about. Yes,
That's
that
terrifying.
is terrifying. Yeah,
That
like
feels super illegal too.
Yeah.
yes. And so I know y'all might be curious maybe a little bit about the rules, and I
Mhm.
posted some down I think this is like
Yeah.
there's so many more rules than this. So this is from the 2023 to 2024 student handbook. So this is just a few of the rules. So students are barred from any physical oh, this is funny how they word this, barred from any physical contact between unmarried men and women. Those side hugs are permitted for photographs.
4 photographs. So you can hug, just get somebody to pretend they're taking your picture, and
Make
it's
sure you take a
permissible at that
photo.
point.
Yeah.
And they say they added that little tidbit in there because we would have these at least once or twice a month. They would call them artist series, and they were like, um, I call them concerts, not like the kind of rock concerts, like classical concerts type things, like the musical concerts that they would have, or plays that they would put on that we were required to go to. And it was people would get pictures, and and women with their dresses, men in their suits and ties and whatever together. And that was the one time that you would find an artist series date. You would pick someone to go with, and the guy would bring flowers or something, and like you go in and you sit in this auditorium with all these other students, and then that was, I know, it was so ridiculous. Oh my
Wow.
goodness.
That's
And so
amazing.
that's why they added that in there. Like it's okay if you hug. And some of the other rules were, it says students students are instructed to avoid rock, pop, jazz, country, and rap music, which have the markers of our current corrupt culture. Um, Dance with expressions of worldliness or sexually provocative nature is prohibited. Students are not permitted to view movies with a higher than a PG rating. Students must wear conservative business casual attire to class. Students' rooms are checked 3 times a week. BJU reserves the right to monitor all network activity on student computers. Students are expected to attend a church approved by the school and record their weekly church attendance online, and same-sex dating or advocating for such dating is banned. So those are just some of the list, just a little bit of
Yeah.
the rules there. And, going there, I was definitely no stranger to strict rules. Like I had followed that my entire life. But for me, I learned that the way they enforced rules, well, number one, they had a lot of authorities throughout this environment. So when you live in the dormitory, there is the doom. Ooh, that's the Freudian slip. There, doom supervisor. Ooh.
That's probably more
I
accurate,
mean,
though.
it
Yeah.
fits. We can roll with it.
Oops. That's funny. Dorm supervisor, and there's a dorm counselor, and then and they're like the two main ones over the dorm. And then on each floor there is, what was it called? Oh my gosh, like a residence hall assistant or something like that. And then there were discipleship groups that met several nights a week, and so there were several discipleship group leaders throughout the floor, and then there were assistant discipleship group leaders. Whatever. So anyway, so there's all these authorities
Yeah.
throughout it, and the culture, it was very much a snitching culture there. So if you saw someone breaking a rule and you did not report them, you were just as, if it's found out that you did not report them, you're just as guilty for whatever they did.
Yeah.
So it created a very vigilant culture where you always felt watched, and I felt like I could not just trust anyone. So very hypervigilant, a lot of anxiety. So I'll stop there for a second if there's anything that I want to dig into.
Well, I just think I want to add a disclaimer for people who are like, if you never went to a Christian college, for example, you're like, oh, that's just Bob Jones. But I feel like that level of unchecked power, exertion over so many areas of life, the vigilance and like the surveillance culture,
Yeah.
that feels very like similar to a lot of Christian colleges, even if they weren't considered more fundamentalist like
Yes.
BJU or Pensacola Christian. Of course we hear all the horror stories coming out of there, but there's so many other Christian universities and colleges
Yes.
that essentially charge you like $100,000 or more to
Yes.
really have this surveillance environment and do it all for the glory of God, which I also want to echo then that to that point, like when you're coming out of these fundamentalist environments that you've grown up in, not only is this normal, but there is an element of freedom because you don't have your parents. And so it does feel like, oh, this is, I've already been going to church. I've already been only giving side hugs. I've already, been like doing X, Y, or Z. So this is not like a stretch. This isn't hard for me to adopt. In fact, there's maybe a little bit more freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I was just going to say it's actually very validating here. You've described this at Bob Jones University because it's like, it's that culture is also what it was like at Adventist universities. And I didn't even go to one. I went, academy, high school, all of that. I did all the other stuff, but no, that's what everything you're describing, and like that resonates. Oh yeah, like I know so many folks, even from my background, that absolutely hearing this, it's like that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad. And that was one thing I covered in the Surviving Bob Jones University podcast, and especially I think the last episode, I was like, this is not just happening at Bob Jones University.
Yeah.
This is throughout so many Christian colleges. When I was making that podcast, like it bothered me of how dismissive people, like, oh, well, they chose to go to that school. But it's not that black and white. And throughout that series, I tried to communicate really, I guess, and I don't think I used the term in it, but I wish I would have, but coercive control is just such a common thing and thread really throughout all of these environments, and whatever the beliefs or theology, whatever it is, like there are these similar patterns of authority and control that are being used. And there's always justification for the justification for what was happening at Bob Jones was for our own spiritual good. We were going to come out at the end of our education, not only with what we were told was going to be a good education, in air quotes, but also that we were going to be transformed and change people. We would not be the same people coming out of that. And we would one day be grateful for them for like having these rules and these things, this discipline to make us better people. So,
Right.
yeah.
I never got told that, like from a like a Christian college standpoint, although I did go to two Christian colleges / universities for my undergrad and master's degree. But I remember being told that by a pastor, multiple pastors, multiple times. They're like, it's that we're doing this for your own good. So we're like exuding this abusive behavior. And someday you are going to thank us for it because it is going to make you a better person. And I just want to like go on the record to be like, I'm still waiting for it to have done me good. And that's like
same.
20 years have passed, It's like so wild.
No, it is crazy. And even as I've been looking back on those experiences, and I've been working on a memoir to even just process that too. Like I look back and I thought about like some people, have said to me like, oh, well, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? Or why did you let them? And I was like, I believe they had the right to do, like, even with like them following me off campus, I never thought that was illegal. You know what I mean? Like being
Yeah.
stalked, I was like, oh, or even like to talk to someone about that. And again, like you couldn't question the system. And
Yeah.
so it never occurred to me then, like, oh, I have rights. Oh, like
Yeah.
that's not okay. They don't have the right to do that over to me. So, and that is something like in these systems is they make you so dependent on them and really take away that autonomy and that I think sense of questioning so much.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm curious too, because especially in light of you saying like coercive control and recognizing it through that lens. So they have all of these rules, these expectations, codes of conduct, whatever it is they called it. But what would happen if you didn't? Like when you did try to break, like maybe intentionally, like
Mm.
circumnavigate some of these rules, or somebody, what actually happened? Like what were the consequences?
Yeah. So I actually have the rule book because, like, when I saw that question, I was like, what are the consequences? So the very first semester, I tried to perfectly follow the rules and be like the perfect member that they wanted me to be. And like, it was really, I mean, for me, like, it was really, really awful. I was like, I cannot do this. This is horrible. And so I was like, I'm going to have to learn to break the rules. And one, I was terrified of that because once you disobey authority, like God's gonna come for you, or your spiritual protection is gone, like you're going down a dark path. But I was like, for me, I got to the point where I had to break the rules to protect my mental health. And so regarding what happened, so I'm looking at the rule book. So I'm going to quickly do a summary of this with infractions. So there's room check. So we had to clean our rooms basically every day, and it was checked 3 times a week. And so there was increments of infractions. So the first 2 times per room, it was like 0, 0, and then it would be 2, 2, 4, 4, 6. It would continue on up. And then minor infractions were like late returning to residence hall, late to required activity, failure to meet with student life. So if you got in trouble and you didn't meet with them, room curfew, failure to follow instructions, and these infractions were like 5, 10, 25, some of them 15. Major infractions were so a fourth repeated occurrence of a minor infraction was 25. And the major infractions are 25. So unacceptable music, 25. Failure to follow instructions, so attire or horseplay, 25. Late to residence hall, or significantly late to residence hall, 25. So that's tier 1. Tier 2 offenses, so like accumulating infractions totaling 50 demerits. That's a conduct warning. Breach of security, which that was one that I actually got my third year, which we can get into that story maybe another time. That's 50. So I got 50 for breach of security and a conduct warning.
Wow.
Untruthfulness, that's 50. Off-campus infraction, vulgarity, destruction of school or personal property, unacceptable video reading material, that's 50. Unauthorized spending the night somewhere else, unauthorized overnight spent somewhere else, 50. Anger, fighting, and all these ones I'm naming are 50. Attending a movie, inappropriate concert dancing, smoking tobacco, theft, indiscreet sensual behavior, disorderly conduct, alcohol, drugs. So that was definitely suspension for that. And there were things like campus arrest. I think you got like 75 Like I think, I don't know if I'm exactly right on this, but a certain amount you couldn't go off campus, and you lost leadership positions. You couldn't be in extracurricular activities. And then when I got there, this is another way they made money. When you got 25 demerits, once you got 25, you would pay $25. 50 demerits, 50. Like they would start like charging your account.
I was
That
wondering
started when I
about
was
that.
there. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
To
Wow.
make money. And I remember one service, they're like, yeah, because of all the infractions you've been getting, this is how many thousands of dollars we have made from you. Yes, they
Oh
would,
my gosh.
they would just like put that in front of us, like look at all, like it was just made, just like
Wow.
taunting us. But, so yeah, so there, and that's the thing, like once you really like messed up, you were watched. Like you were no longer just a face in the crowd
Yeah.
anymore. You were definitely on their radar, and so those were some of the consequences and the infractions. And yeah, for breach of security, I don't know if y'all want me to go into that story or not that I broke, but I don't know if y'all had any thoughts about the rules or the consequences, or anything.
Well, I mean, they're just so it's just so much, and I cannot get away from like this thought of like you're gonna pay us over $100,000, and not only might you have to pay more, but like it is so heavily surveilled and so strict with
Mm,
everything. And it, yeah, I mean, like on the one hand, I don't get it anymore.
yeah,
But on the other hand, I totally
yeah,
get it. And I think we should definitely have you back on to tell
I
a
would
little
love
bit more of
to.
like your whole story and
Yes.
like the security stuff or whatever. But as you were talking, I wondered, like we have this surveillance kind of culture, right? Where people are snitching on one another, where they're like looking for ways for you to get these infractions and
Yeah.
everything. Did you ever sense then like a feeling of entrapment, whether that was like spiritually or financially, like once you're enrolled, kind
Mm,
of even barriers to being able to leave school or, like
yeah.
transfer out or, it just feels like such a
Mm,
insulated culture
yeah.
and, yeah, and it doesn't feel particularly healthy.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, I would say I definitely felt trapped. And now that you're saying that, I remember my first semester there, especially, I mean, my mental health was a struggle
Yeah.
throughout all of my years there, but my freshman year, I think, was probably the worst of like mental health
Mm.
struggles, definitely. And so I remember towards the end of my first semester, just sobbing in my room and being like, I cannot believe I worked so hard to
Mm.
save $7,000 and I just poured it in this school and that's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
That's gone. It's in this school and I hated it so much. And
Wow.
so that was a moment of like, oh, like I can't just pour all this money into this and not continue. And there was also that if I don't continue this, then I'm trapped under my parents' authority. So it was
Wow.
either the
Yeah.
authority of Bob Jones or authority of my parents. I'd be trapped there. So it was just a double bind, I guess, maybe would be a way to say it,
Yeah.
is either we're rock in a hard place. Like either option was not good. So yes, I felt very much trapped. And I just kept telling myself, I'm like, all right, just 4 years and you can get out of this, like that you get that accredited degree and you can make it, try to make it on the outside world. So yeah, I felt very much trapped in the spiritual aspect of it. I mean, I did feel very very much spiritually trapped, because I think even with the IFB and even with Bob Jones in these systems of control, it's all about getting you to believe that their way is God's way. So if you don't do it their way, you are going against God. And if you're not seeing the results of that, you're not spiritual enough. You're not good enough. So sorry, you got to keep like reaching these impossible standards. And also it's not only doing it, but being happy about it and feeling good about it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was very much um, this constant striving, trying to just culture of just perfectionism, performance surveillance, and control. That was, yeah. And then also again with me navigating my sexuality,
Yeah.
that was a whole other, I think,
Yeah.
aspect of the school. Yeah,
Yeah. That's why I think it would be good to have you on to
yeah,
talk more about that and how it, ultimately maybe got you kicked out a little bit.
yeah.
Just a little.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Ooh, that's I know, yeah, because there's a lot to go into, and so I hope I haven't been dominating it too much. But I definitely
No.
want y'all to like say
Yeah.
what y'all want to say or like share what you want to share.
No, I think that's so helpful to hear that just
Mm-mm.
because, yeah, I think it's like these ins and outs of, yeah, like you think you're going away to college, you get, you're starting
Mm.
to be an adult, you're starting to, you're in that transitory period between, adolescence and adulthood. And it just, everything you're describing is so controlling and meant to be that way, and then
Yeah,
meant to be gaslighting you
yeah,
into thinking that this is for your own good or this is how God wants it. And
yeah,
it is so abusive in my opinion.
yeah.
And
It
then to put
is.
a price tag on it. So like not only are we going to do that, because that's what a lot of churches do, but and
Yeah,
yeah, they want you to pay like 10% of your income, and they might have some pretty sleazy tactics about getting
yeah,
that. But you're not necessarily paying to go to church, right?
yeah,
Like in this, like it's even one more element I think of abuse, because
yeah,
you're getting that entire like controlling environment,
yeah,
and then they're saying, by the way, give us this money every
yeah.
year, and be
My God.
grateful about it. And
Mm,
if you don't follow our rules, we're going to charge you more money, potentially kick you out, not refund you.
mm.
Like all these things, which just feels very, it feels very alarming.
Yeah.
Yes, very
Yeah,
much.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's an important piece too, because I know you were mentioning people having kind of some folks having the response of like, um, well, like you chose to go there, or 'cause, at that point it's not like high school, like you are legally an adult,
Yeah.
sure.
and so it's like on one level it's easy for people to shrug and be like, well, you knew what you were getting into, or you should have
Mm,
at least.
yeah.
But it's just important, I think, especially in these systems, like pointing out like that's the dynamic, not only with the institution, but also like with family, with parents.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's it's like, I mean, maybe you are getting like just enough financial help from parents that like I can't just not go here. I can't just
Yes,
transfer over to
exactly.
like
Mm-hmm.
like a state university nearby, or it's not that
Yeah.
simple, because like not only it's not just about just getting like student loans for that, because then
Mm-hmm.
suddenly if like your cost of living and everything else, like if your parents are like also leveraging everything, so that
Yes.
no, this is these are, you have to go to
Mm-hmm.
an acceptable school, or
Yeah.
one that's Christ centered or Christian
Mm.
or whatever. And
Gosh, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
there's so many angles to it. And
Yeah.
I actually was curious too, just on that note, even like what sort of I'm curious what kind of narratives you experience, both like in church but also like with your like family, your parents, like when it came to I'm justifying the bill basically, because I mean Christian universities are just not cheap. I mean, there's no other
Yeah.
way to say it. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious how that narrative was handled.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, justifying the bill at Boston University. Yeah, I mean, I think the accreditation was something. And I think something that did make them different was that they had all kinds of majors to choose from different fields, which is so unusual for I'm laughing or smiling at that now because Bob Jones calls itself the world's most unusual university. That was yeah,
Huh.
a
Okay.
tagline on a lot of things. Like, yeah, they called them yeah, and like there was the unusual films productions that they had. That was anyways, yes. So they proud like again, it's that proud of like being we're different, we're set apart, we're a peculiar people like with them, and that makes us better. But anyways, that's a whole other area.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was the accreditation. And I remember when I was there, Steve Pettit, who was the president during that time, oh gosh, it was so annoying. Every semester he would talk about how it was like, I think it was like US colleges news or something that Bob Jones would always be like, at least in the top 5 best value school of the South, that it would rate it. I don't know what the rankings were like really based on at all
It's
behind
like
that.
you guys, PCC, like a tiny community college in a rural area or something. It's like, yeah, and a high school or something.
And yeah, I mean, they made you think that you were a part of just something that was so special and so important. And what an honor for you for it was for you to be there. And like it was almost as if like
Wow.
you don't deserve to be here. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Like that's how great they are. Like this spiritual
Yeah.
superiority. And it was all just again like Bob Jones Sr. and his legacy, which is really actually awful. But they cover that up. Like they really thought that like he was his man chosen by God and all of this And that's the thing, even okay, going back to what you were saying, Andrew, about the narrative. Now, I'm glad that I'm saying this because now that I'm thinking about it, it was always like, this is proof that we are right. Like, look at all these buildings. Look at this legacy. Look at all the people here. Now, Bob Jones, they're living in people, like, their enrollment is really low. They are actually struggling so much right now that they're giving out free tuition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was something I want to say too. But you have to qualify though. You have to apply through FAFSA, and see
Okay.
if you qualify. But they are giving out free tuition. And I think, because again, if it's not really obviously free because they'll get money from the government. So they want them to apply so they'll get that money from the government. But anyways, so
Interesting.
yes. So anyway, so that's something that's going on right now. And someone texted me yesterday. They're like, "Hey, Andrew, want to let you know that Bob Jones they're posting signs about free tuition in underprivileged areas, and that really bothers me." And I was like, okay, yeah. So
Okay, so one of the questions we had for you, I'm skipping. I want to come back to another one, but as you're talking about this, the question that I thought of is, what changes do you think need to happen to make Christian higher ed more ethical and financially responsible? And it's like, oh wow, like maybe stop, marketing to people that you're totally bamboozling. Like you're not offering them education because you believe that they deserve an education.
yeah,
It's a proselytizing mission.
it is. Yeah.
But yeah, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, that was interesting when I read that question because I was like, shut all of them down. That was my first response, like, get rid of them. And so I think, and obviously, I don't want to say that because I know people might get upset, but it's just, if for me, here's my thing. I get the whole people have a right to their beliefs. And like Bob Jones has touted that for years with their court case or whatever, the Supreme Court, like, we have a right to our beliefs. We have a right to our beliefs. You can't take away our beliefs. And so, I'm glad there's shows like this and even the work that I've done that we can call out harmful beliefs and the impact, but beliefs cannot be criminalized, sadly. And so, but coercive control can be, and
Yeah,
it's not in the
yeah.
US. So I
Yeah.
think with Christian colleges and even all kinds of religious groups, in order to hold them accountable, I think coercion has to really be criminalized in the US. It's like, okay, you can believe this. That's fine. But oh, guess what? You cannot follow and stalk or even just threaten your own student. Like, you cannot do that because that is
Yeah.
coercion. That's not okay. So when we get into the behaviors, and I think, a lot of these systems are harmful because they have an authoritarian structure, and authoritarian institutions or systems, like, they're always going to be abusive. And so they would have to go back and question and be like, oh, wow, a lot of this is actually rooted in white supremacy and authoritarianism. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. And so it would have to be going back to the roots of it to question that. And so I don't think any would want to do that or recognize, even with Bob Jones, where it's so obvious and clear that its foundations are in white supremacy. They would still just will not look at that. And interracial dating and marriage was banned until 2000 at Bob Jones University. So ridiculous. So, but I think, a lot of institutions won't do that. But I think a solution will be criminalizing that, but not only criminalizing it, but people being educated, I think, on coercive control and just high control groups or cults in general. Because it's hard because there's this, I call the IFB a cult and I call Bob Jones a cult. And there are people that fight back and forth about what's a cult, what's not a cult, blah, blah, blah. But for me, I think that term is so important because of the language. A survivor can look at that language and say, oh, I relate to the impact of this. And here's language for this. And here are resources that I can get to recover. And oh, here's information where, oh, wow, this is also similar to abusive relationships too. Like, wow. And so it can help, knowledge is power. So I think that, it has been something that is important for my journey is accessing that knowledge to free myself from that system and to really shed a light and help other people wake up and free themselves from that indoctrination and that cult control, really.
That's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing
Oh,
that.
you're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm curious. I actually have kind of two parts in this question. Let me hold on. The first piece is I would just simply ask, what advice would you give somebody who might be considering going to a Christian college? And then the second, it's related to the first, is what then advice or thoughts would you give to someone who maybe they're already in the midst of it and are like, oh crap, what have I done?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say for people considering going to a Christian college, and I'm answering the question from the perspective of this person actually wants to go, at least.
Sure.
Fair.
Well,
That's fair.
well, I'll try to. If you act maybe, which it's interesting because I don't think Bob Jones would exist without parents forcing their children to go there. It's a whole other area, but yeah, assuming someone really wants to do that, I would say look into the history of that school. Look into what maybe other students might say about that school. What kind of resources do they have? How do they view mental health? What options and autonomy? Because I know there are Christian schools out there that will give you more autonomy. I know like it exists on a spectrum. It depends. But yeah, like what, and asking yourself if going to this school, if I go to this school, am I allowed to be me? Am I allowed to be me?
Yeah.
And if you answer, you can look at that and say, oh, wow, I don't think I can be myself at this school. Like, I think that's a major red flag. And you should, consider looking at a school where you are valued and every part of you is valued. And not valued just for not valued for what you do, but who you are. And I would say for people in the midst of that who maybe like feel trapped or stuck or want to leave, I would say, and it's hard because, with Bob Jones, when I was there, it was accredited. So during that time, there was a possibility for me to transfer out. But with my parents, again, I think I did not because the finances would have been revoked and I would not have had that. But if people
Yeah.
feel like they can and they're at a school that is accredited to transfer out, and it's hard because I know there's so many that aren't. It's kind of like, it's like this, I feel like it's like the sunk cost fallacy of like, oh, I put so much time and energy and money into this. I cannot stop now. And I would say, which might be, I think it's hard, it would be hard to do in that moment, but say to yourself, is this worth trauma and deteriorating of my mental health? And I think even walking away and throwing it away, maybe it will be hard, but I think that is the most powerful and I think the resilient thing you could do is say, no, I choose me over this system and my well-being. It's more important than getting this degree or getting this qualification of just claiming who you are. I think I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. So I know we only have a couple minutes left, so maybe a weird question to end on, but maybe also inspires hope. Like,
Yeah.
if you could go back, what would you do differently?
Oh my gosh. Ooh. No, it's hard because as I've been in therapy and, processing my own journey through writing, and even people have said to a friend of mine who got out about Jones, they're like, I wish I could have gone back and told you not to go to that school. And and then I was like, oh, well, I would have never, met you or, I wouldn't have had. So it's hard because, there was so many abusive things in that system that harmed me. But at the same time, and maybe we'll probably get into this in the part two, going to Bob Jones, I ended up exploring outside of that system and finding chosen family that would eventually rescue me and get me out of that. So it's hard because yes, like I went there, but through my own exploration, things worked out despite the trauma. And yeah, I mean, I think right now, that's the things that I might have done differently. I think something I think I do feel like I wish I would have done too is just reached out to some people around me that I could feel were really hurting, but still afraid. Even like people I could tell, oh, you're struggling, you're obviously queer, but you're here and you are so miserable. But there is still that fear of me, like what happens if I reveal this part of myself? Or so there is that part of me that, oh, I wish there were people that I would have connected to. But again, like I was so disconnected from myself and traumatized. It was so hard to connect with the people in general, which that's a whole other area. But I think that was one of the things that I think I would have done differently.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have so many more questions,
Yeah.
but I'm like leaving them in my mind and I'm going to type them all out after this. Andrew, is there any other, well, sorry, Andrew Curves, is there any other
He's like, which
questions
Andrew?
you
Yeah.
had? Or Andrew Pledger, is there anything else before we close up this interview that you want to add?
Oh gosh. I mean, yeah, I'll let Andrew Herbs answer the question if he wants to first, and then I'll say, well, yeah.
No, I mean, honestly, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, oh man, we could definitely talk about this for
Yeah.
so much, hours. I think it's just so much of it resonates. And I know that it's going to resonate with so many folks that listen to the podcast from so many different backgrounds of fundamentalist
Yeah.
Christianity, but so I just appreciate everything you've shared.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, right now, I think for anything that I might add, I'm sure we'll cover a lot more in the next episode. But one thing I would say is in these systems of control, you're very isolated, and it's very easy to think that you are alone, but you are definitely not alone. And this system tries to make you think that it's your fault and that something's wrong with you for feeling a certain way or not conforming, but you are not alone, and other people are having doubts and have questions and are experiencing harm from that system, and that you don't have to suffer in silence.
That's so beautiful.
Oh,
Thank you.
oh.
Could not agree more. You don't have to suffer in silence. So,
Yes.
you've talked a little bit throughout this podcast about your Bob Jones University podcast and all of that. So tell people kind of some of the things that you work on, where they can find you, so that they can stay connected to your work.
Yeah. So people can follow me on social media. Right now, my handle is Andrew Pledger Writes, and I'm hoping to have more updates and things about the book that I'm working on, which I'm really excited for. Hopefully this year we'll see. But I do the podcast Surviving Bob Jones University. That was a limited series, and that is done. But I also have a podcast called Beyond BJU, Exposing Fundamentalism, and people can watch that. And that's about to go into like a transition later this year. So we'll see how that's going to turn out too. It's just interesting. But yeah, those are the places that people can find me and see my work.
I love that. Yes. So everybody make sure to go follow Andrew. We'll have all of your information in the show notes as well.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for having me. I was looking forward, just so excited for this. Like I know, Laura, it's been a long time since we connected, and I'm so glad to finally meet you, Andrew. I know I've been looking forward to that.
You as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again to Andrew Pledger for joining us today for such a great conversation. I know for me, there was many more questions I thought I wanted to ask. So I think we will have to have Andrew back for another episode to hear more about his story, because it is wild and it is deeply intertwined with Bob Jones University and like getting kicked out and all those things. So it goes right on the heels. But yeah, I realized like as I was listening, I was getting so upset. Not with Andrew or his story, but just like the whole like dynamics behind like Christian and religious universities and how messed up it is. Like I feel like I could go on a whole rant.
Yeah. I mean, same here. And it was a great conversation. And yeah, I think the thing I noticed for me the most was just how, like I've heard of Bob Jones University. I don't personally know anything about it other than just I've known a few friends who've gone there because I grew up not far from there. It's down in South Carolina, and I grew up in North Carolina and all of that. But just hearing the stories, and I'm like, that sounds just like stories I've heard from Southern Adventist University. or you name it.
Yeah.
There's several Adventist universities in the U.S., but I think just it's felt so familiar. It felt so familiar,
Yeah.
and I like, oh my gosh, like this isn't, there's so many people I think that can probably relate to this because
Yeah.
it's like this is just those of us who went to Christian fundamentalist Christian higher education, like that's the world we existed in. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's kind of validating to hear someone else who
Yeah.
isn't even from my religious background, but went through the same thing.
Yeah. It's funny because I did, I mentioned this when in our conversation with Andrew, I did go to some Christian colleges, universities for my undergrad and graduate degree. And I did primarily like online and hybrid programs where be on campus for a little bit and you'd go back, go home or whatever. It was great because you kind of
Hmm.
got like the best of both worlds essentially. So like when I was at Liberty, they've got the what's called the Liberty Way, which is their covenant that you're supposed to sign. Andrew was talking about that too. And ours was not as extensive, of course, because we didn't live on campus, but it was still pretty strict. And I
Hmm.
remember thinking that there was still possibilities that if I were to mess up according to what their standards were, I really thought that I would probably be found out. Like I wondered, like I had this secret fear that they had called the pastors at my church to let them know I was a student, which now I know like they literally can't do that, but I didn't know that back then. And I thought like, oh, they've probably called my pastors and my pastors are now watching me to make sure that I'm not like letting go of any of the rules that Liberty has for me. And if I break them, I will definitely be kicked out. Like that's how much of a surveillance culture I think there is in these universities and colleges. And I didn't even live on campus and I was in my mid 20s
Wow.
when I was there. Mid to late 20s.
That's amazing. The surveillance culture, how hyper vigilant then you as a student feel like you have to be because they're just constantly watching to find fault.
Yeah.
It feels like, and it's like, yeah, that's amazing though. Like not even living on campus and being in your mid
Yeah.
20s. Like it's one thing to be like an 18-year-old freshman living in the dorm. Like, okay, I get that. I can see that. But wow,
Yeah.
that's remarkable.
Yeah. I was a rule follower, just really good at that.
Yeah.
So, anyway. Well, I feel like there's so many more conversations we had, and I hope that people like this episode just because I think before you got on, Andrew, the other Andrew and I were talking, and he was saying, like, these are so many of the questions that we had for him were things that, he didn't even think about when he was there. But now as he's thinking back and reflecting on them, he realizes to the extent that he was impacted by this Christian institution and the finances around it and, just how much that skewed his vision of himself and, what he was supposed to be doing. And I was reminded that I think that for many people, even if they didn't have as strict of an environment, there still are those lasting impacts. And so many of us that are coming out of high control religions went the Christian college route because that was what God wanted. And so I'm just hopeful that this episode will speak to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, I am too. I'm feeling very grateful
Yeah.
that we had the time we did with Andrew today. I think it'll be great.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for another episode of Sunday School Dropouts. And I think with that, all God's people said, Amen.
Amen.